Go. All right. Hi, everybody. It's March 17th. Hello there. Hello here. Thank you to the people who came out in the rain, came in person. So somebody to talk to here. Totally fine. Everybody who did not come in the rain. Of course, those of you that are, not supposed to come in person anyway. Of course, that makes sense. So today we're going to continue talking about terrorism. There are two things in the news that I want to draw your attention to just before we start. One is the Office of the Director of National Intelligence released a report yesterday that says that both Russia and Iran tried to interfere in the US 2020 election, in particular through what's known as influence operations, and that China made a strategic calculation not to, that they thought that the risk reward was not in their interest, which I think is interesting, and that is going to come up. So keep an eye on how that story develops, but that'll come up in the class both when we discuss intelligence soon and then towards the end of the class when we talk about Russia and especially Russian disinformation. So that's one. Two is one that is going to a good example of when I said there's unfortunate timing about this stuff tends to happen. But two was there was a attack in Atlanta at this was I think either just last night or then maybe news broke of it this morning. But an attack in Atlanta on 3 Asian massage parlors killed 8 people, 6 of them Asian women, and we're still developing story. I'm not sure whether I would classify it as terrorism or not, but is at least possible. Say whether political or personal, don't know, but appears to be based on preliminary information, motivated by kind of a combination of misogyny and anti-Asian racism. Again, more of that will come out. I caution everybody, both here or anybody else you talk to, that there is absolutely nothing lost in waiting for a little bit until we get more information, and rather than jumping to conclusions. But those are, say, reasonable suspicions at this point. Any questions or comments on either of those things before I kind of jump into today's topic? All right, so I have the whoops, sorry, screen just flopped. So I have the chat open as usual, if anybody has any questions. And otherwise, let me just go back to first the very end of yesterday's lecture and pick up where we left off. So slideshow. Good. Good. Okay, just a way that I like to close a terrorism discussion that also be relevant for today's discussion too, but is to think of cases as terrorist or not a terrorist. So various ones that especially from fiction, like we can do some real world ones, but especially fiction. And so let me go back for everybody to see the possible definitions. So as a caveat, I'm going to pick a couple, say, well-known pop culture things. If for whatever reason you do not want me to spoil, say, Harry Potter or Star Wars or the Hunger Games, I mean, I guess say something, though at this point, if you haven't seen those, my guess is you don't really care about having the story spoiled for them. It's not like you've lacked for opportunities or haven't heard about them, say in the past. But let me start off with this one. When you think of the different definitions of terrorism, remember, a terrorist is somebody who uses terrorism, or at least let's say makes terrorism their primary tool. That either of those I think are acceptable in terms of terrorist. But think of these and other examples that we discussed last time, and I'll kind of open this up both to people online and in person. So take your pick when it comes in. But first one. Voldemort and the Death Eaters, terrorist or not a terrorist? And I'm not going to answer. I'll just tell you in advance about today with terms of interaction. I'm not going to answer any of these until somebody else goes. That there's no way none of you have an opinion on this. Yes. Yeah, so we have an answer. Yes, in class. I got 2 yeses online. The argument for those of you say who couldn't hear it was especially with the Hoffman definition, definitely creates and exploits fear. And I think this is a key part of this one, is political in that is interested in trying to transform society. As the response highlighted how they think they're altruists, as in what they're doing is attempting to racially purify the wizarding world, that they believe that is better, and that they think this is beneficial for society, that they're doing it for others. Of course, they're doing it for themselves too, but not exclusively. So that idea, they are trying to change society, not just like say accumulate power for its own sake or make money. So in that case, terrorist. Now, let me ask a wrinkle to this. The whole story? Yes. Right. Oh, and that's an added wrinkle. I wasn't going to ask that part, but yes. So the response, and this one I think is fairly easy. So I guess if anybody wants to make the other case, you can. Just want to highlight before I just move on to that answer of this is a good example of why weak is relatively weak. So some people have, when I've asked that one in the past, said, no, Voldemort's one of the most powerful wizards in the world, arguably the most powerful wizard in the world. So he's not relatively weak. So then you can't have the asymmetric aspect of it. And the answer is, especially for the first bunch of books or movies. And I've read and watched them, so I'm going to kind of reference both, and I assume many of you have too. But for the first chunk of he is even after he comes back in the fourth one, he is still, especially he and the Death Eaters, are weak relative to the Aurors and the Ministry and Dumbledore and the rest. And the way you can tell is they hide, pop up to do violence, and then hide again. When you're strong, you don't need to do that. That's something that the relatively weak side does. So the clearest example in all of Harry Potter of a terrorist attack is the attack on the Quidditch World Cup, where that is, pretty clear example of it's violent, it's political. They make a point of, putting that big skull with the snake thing in the sky, so you know who did it, and they're trying to send a message. It's in public. It freaks a lot of people out on purpose. It is trying to also change society. Very clear case of terrorism. However, as was just pointed out here, that once they take over the ministry, they're not the weak actor anymore. They're the state. They're the government. They are operating openly. They're not operating in the shadows. They're walking around and they're basically like doing patrols. And then, and here'd be an interesting one. I haven't fully explored this one, but at that point, are Harry, Ron, and Hermione terrorists? I'll open this one up. So it's kind of funny how many times I've done this and nobody has necessarily brought that one up. I don't know. What do you say? Yes. Yes, the answer is that they hide, they wait to come out. So that would make them, that's a sign that they're relatively weak, which is the case. That they do use force, so they're violent. That's attacks. They're pretty clearly political, right? Uh, any other possible variations? I think there's one factor that we didn't bring up that I think I would classify them as not terrorists. All right, I'll give an answer. My answer on that one, and I said, cool. Now I'm going to incorporate this. I think it's a future lesson to the story. Of I don't think we ever see them attack non-combatants. That where so Battle of Hogwarts at the end, that's more like a pitched battle. Everybody there is a combatant. When they get into the fight with, it's like towards the beginning, I think when they're like out in a cafe. I think this is in the movie, not the book. I think in the book he's in a train station. But anyway, where it's been a bit of a while, but where they get attacked by agents of the state, or like they try to they get into a firefight with agents of the state that people who are working for Voldemort. So those could be fairly considered to be combatants, people who are out there on patrol. I mean, maybe more like police or vigilantes than military, but still, that could be called, combatants. I don't think there's any case of like, unless I'm forgetting something, raise your hand of where things like, Harry and whoever say, let's go like destroy this thing and kill these people to send a message, even though those people are non-combatants. Yeah. What about when they break into Gringotts? That's theft. What they're doing there is not trying to hurt people to send a message. They're not trying to destroy stuff to send a message. They're trying to get a particular thing, and then they end up kind of destroying stuff as cover to help them get out. So that's it's a theft that ends up having like a violent escape, but I wouldn't call that terrorism because they did not target people to kill or hurt. All right. So Voldemort, terrorist, up until he takes over the government. Then what they're doing is state terror. Okay, so that's one. What about the rebels in Star Wars? And I'm thinking primarily of the original 3 movies, but if you want to, I don't know, expand out beyond that. But rebels in Star Wars, terrorists or not? I see terrorist. Well, it's more like a coup led by a cabal of space terrorists. Or is that supposed to be actually 2 separate things? Space terrorists, yes. Everything needs to be added, right? Space in front of it. So got an answer. No, they don't attack non-combatants. And I think that's my answer too, of that insurgents, guerrillas, and many times they're basically just like a fairly symmetric military doing rebellion. When they're flying, big fancy spaceships, that is more like symmetric war, even if they're still relatively smaller. But at least in the first 3 Star Wars movies, there's never a point where we see them attack non-combatants. They attack military targets. So the Death Stars are military targets. The radar installation on Endor, the Ewok moon, that's a military target. I think even in ones like, say, I don't know, Rogue One, I think they're only attacking military targets. Now, the sounds like terrorist propaganda to me. Very nice, thanks. So yeah, we've got an Empire lover here. Great. The Go Empire, beat rebels. Yeah, thanks. Now, the reason why I highlight this one is, much as it's useful to see with Harry Potter the difference between a terrorist and state terror, with Star Wars, highlight the concept of collateral damage. So attacking a military target when civilians also die is different than deliberately attacking a civilian or non-combatant target. So when the rebels in particular, in the 3rd movie, in Return of the Jedi, when they blow up the Death Star that is under construction, they kill a lot of non-combatants who are probably just working on construction. There's an old Kevin Smith joke about this, about how think how many contractors died when the 2nd Death Star was destroyed. Here you are in the Empire. There isn't all that many jobs. Someone's building a moon-sized base. You go and you get some construction work, and then through no fault of your own, boom. So like that would be considered collateral damage, in that the people who the target itself was a military target, but there were civilians there. What collateral damage means is the state that is targeting, or whoever is targeting a military target, is willing to accept that there will be non-military damage in the process. This is a good example of when I say it's not terrorism, it's collateral damage. That doesn't mean I'm saying it's good, or bad. It's not a value judgment. There are instances where you can make a good case that morally a state is way too accepting of collateral damage, or way too indifferent to the possibilities of civilian deaths, or way just too accepting, doesn't even really seem to care, maybe even kind of wants it. But the rebels in Star Wars don't seem to, they're putting the high priority on the military value. They're not trying to kill a bunch of non-combatants to send a message. What about the Joker? And for this one, part of the problem is the character is portrayed in many different ways. So I'm thinking primarily of the Dark Knight version, but you can try me with any other version. That's one where I'm confident I can geek out on that one. So what do you think? Joker, especially in the Dark Knight, you could do the Joaquin Phoenix one, or if anybody wants to do the animated series one, if you want to go there, be happy to. But yeah. Oh, so somebody just asked, isn't there also the reality if you're working on a military project, you're exposed to danger? Yes, to some extent. That you might not sign up expecting it, but yeah, I guess if there's a war on. So like this would be the equivalent of, let's just say, if you were somebody who was non-military that worked in like a cleaning service in Pearl Harbor or something, and then the Japanese bomb it. Are you taking on some danger by working there? Yeah, but also when there's no war, you might not be factoring it in. Okay, so one response, Says definitely the terrorist on Joker, but Bane is a better example. Bane in the third movie, well, you know what? We could do that one too. So I'd like to hear either Christopher, you can flesh that out, or anybody here. But so if you say definitely Joker's a terrorist, why? Does anybody else disagree? I think this is, a debatable case. Or alternatively, if anybody wants to say why Bane is. All right, maybe I'll wait. So think about the Joker. I'll answer the Bane one maybe while people. Oh yes, great. Yeah, again, here's a question, and I think that's a quite a good answer of where it's not totally clear, and this is part of the reason the character has been portrayed in many different ways, in many different versions. So there are definitely Joker stories where the violence for him is personal, meaning either it's just entirely personal versus Batman, that personal obsession with him of like wanting to sort of play games with him. There's a neat depiction of where the character is like singular obsession. The Dark Knight movie kind of touches on this, but becomes trying to make Batman break character. Like that is the most important thing in the world to him, of like trying to corrupt Batman, or basically like, make Batman stop being so darn good, damn it. And Where there are other ones, and this is what the cartoon series does really well, of where it looks like Joker's just basically doing it for the lulz, just sort of for his own amusement, and the rest of the impact doesn't really matter. Someone has here. I do think the Joker. I don't think the Joker's motivations are purely political. No, they don't have to be. But remember, pretty much no terrorist's motivations are purely political. Usually, there can be an element of personal hatred or self-aggrandizement or other stuff mixed in there. So it doesn't need to be pure. Um, the I'll just answer the Bane one. If anyone else thinks of a Joker take, and then I'll add about it a bit. It says Bane is a lot like ISIS, grows stronger, evolves to the level of a government-like entity. So that would be in the third movie. Yes, the wrinkle to it. So in the beginning, it really looks like Bane is a terrorist, where he's trying to be political and making all these points about like class and the wealthy and what have you. And then by the end, it makes it look like it's more of a personal revenge story. So where this is the Dark Knight Returns. So that's where I say Bane, as portrayed at the start, is, and then by the end, it seems like it's more complicated, more personal. So just on the Joker, I think In the Dark Knight is one of the best movies about terrorism I think that's ever been made. I would call the Joker a terrorist in that, in particular, political, in that he is trying to make a point. What politics? He doesn't necessarily have a vision of a world he'd prefer. He's basically an anarchist. The way he portrays it, of wants to break down the order in society. I want to show everybody. And the one of the best lines I think I've seen in pop culture about terrorism, period, is there's a scene where the Joker has where Batman had basically taken a bunch of mob money, and the Joker gets it back, and he builds a big giant pyramid of money, and he lights it on fire, and a bunch of the gangsters freak out. And he says in one of the more memorable lines of the movie, "It's not about money; it's about sending a message." That's a pretty clear example of somebody who's motivated not by personal gain, money, but about sending that message of trying to, change society, say, in some way or another, more to his liking. The other thing, just The Dark Knight is a great example of the Joker character, of a literary thing, if you're not familiar with, but is worth, I think, understanding, not directly related to terrorism, but called an unreliable narrator, in that when he tells you what his motivations are, there's no reason you should believe him. Like there's and this is also made part of the reason why the movie's so clever is because this becomes clear when he tells the second story about how he got his scars. That's totally different from the first one. Then you know that he's just making it up. That at least one of those is a lie, probably both. And so later in the movie, when he says things like, do I look like a guy with a plan? And the answer is implied, no. But like, yeah, Joker, you do. This whole movie is, like your plan in action. So you don't necessarily need to trust him. But so I'd call that version political. Someone just asked, so is the League of Shadows a terrorist organization? Yeah, I'd say so, especially the way that it's portrayed in Batman Begins, and when Liam Neeson talks about how that they like we sacked Rome and we spread the plague rats, and makes this analogy to a forest fire, like a cleansing forest fire. So yeah, are they doing that for themselves, just to like make themselves money or get revenge? No, they think that there's a certain way that the world should work, that the world is better, and they use violence to bring that violence against non-combatants, including spreading fear. And in Batman Begins, I mean, there's the fear-spreading gas, so it's pretty on the nose in that regard. So yeah, I'd say in that one, the League of Shadows, yes. How about, so this is one I like. This is a good one because I think it's a little complicated. But so how about Katniss Everdeen? Katniss in the Hunger Games. What do you think? Terrorist or not a terrorist? So insurgent, why? Or, and while he's typing, if anybody in person has an answer. I don't recall her attacking civilians. Yeah, so this is one of the, yes, go on. Take your pick. So the question is, are we going her District 13? And just somebody online says Katniss not a terrorist, but the rebel leaders were. So yeah, why would you think that? Yeah, and they bomb. So they definitely bomb civilian targets, the non-combatant targets. So I think it's pretty safe to say that District 13 does violence against civilians. That is some terrorism. Although then again, when they're invading the capital in force, that is more like symmetric warfare by that point at the end. Like they've got flying ships of whatever those like thingamabobs, I forgot what they call them, but like big flying ships, among other stuff as they're going in. The also works in military, so she's kind of an irregular, maybe special forces. So the part that I find why Katniss is such an interesting case is then there's also the issue of she does assassinate a political leader. So that final action arguably is, but before that, the reason why Katniss is such an interesting case is if we take it as a given, let's just say for argument's sake, District 13, the rebels are terrorists, or at least use terrorism. So they're terrorists and other things, but they're also terrorists. She is then a spokesperson for terrorists. And reason why I bring that one up is there's a case of someone named Anwar al-Awlaki, who was a American citizen, was also a spokesperson and recruiter for Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. He was open about this. This is not a secret. I have no doubt that he actually was. The US killed him in a drone strike. The reason why it's a complicated case is because he was an American citizen. So the president revoked his constitutional rights without trial, which I think this pretty strong case is unconstitutional. And yet, he was someone who was very open about trying to inspire attackers, who had been in contact with people who committed terrorist attacks in the United States, including the Fort Hood shooter, among others, but did not actually commit a terrorist attack himself. So if you are a spokesperson for a terrorist group and you're a propagandist for a terrorist group, are you yourself a terrorist or not? I'm not totally sure on that one. I mean, I'd say yes, in the sense that you were aiding a terrorist effort, and that would mark Katniss as a propagandist for a terrorist group, a terrorist. But she herself, even though she is violent at times, is not violent against non-combatant targets, except maybe one politician at the end. Okay, just one. Well, I'll stop it there because I want to do the white nationalist one. But if anybody wants to bring up some other of these, that I always think this is a neat way to explore some of the ideas, and kind of who say classifies where. All right, let me switch slides, and I will tell you. Oops. Open. Okay. Yep. Share. Here we go. All right. Far right and white nationalist terrorism. Here we go. So we're in the United States. Well, let me even just sort of take a step back really quick here. The reason why I've increasingly incorporated this topic into lectures and into my terrorism class and other things we talk about this is the increasing prevalence of it. I'll show you actual data, but in terms of who has killed more Americans in terrorist attacks recently, It is far-right white nationalist terrorists, not jihadist terrorists, that I have studied jihadist terrorism more, in part because I think that was kind of a bigger security threat. There's often, when I bring up that point about, say these groups have killed more people in the United States, I mean, also in some other places than jihadists, sometimes get a response of, oh, so you're saying like this one's a threat and the other one isn't? And the answer is no. I'm saying that both are above the threshold of threat that we should take seriously. And I suppose also as a caveat of far right means, of course, far. So sometimes people who, if you say like far right, then maybe people who consider themselves conservative get defensive. Far left, people consider themselves progressive get defensive. And the answer is we're talking about, just like with jihadists, extremists. And if for whatever reason you hear something like white nationalist, and maybe you're white and your reaction is, no, 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 I don't support that. Or you're, say a conservative and you hear far right and you think, no, no, I don't support that. Well, now you know how most Muslims feel about Al Qaeda and ISIS. That it's where these people are extremists. They're not like me. I don't agree with them. And why are some of you looking at me as if I'm associated with them in some manner? So in the United States, where this probably goes back, is thinking about it kind of as a movement to the Oklahoma City bombing, which was the largest terrorist attack in the United States before 9/11. Was in 1995 at a federal building in Oklahoma City. There was a truck bomb. You can see the devastation of it. Took out the entire front of the building, and killed 168, injured over 650. Sorry, it was made with fertilizer, with a kind of high nitrate that's concentrated fertilizer that large industrial farms will buy and then mix with other stuff. One thing to emphasize about that one is I told you I kind of collect dumb terrorist stories. An example of one of them was the attempted Times Square bomber in the 2000s. Had a van, also had his van packed with fertilizer and some gasoline, and the bomb didn't go off. So even he made a bad trigger. But if the bomb had gone off after the bomb squad dismantled it, they realized that the fertilizer inside his truck was not this high concentrated nitrate, but was in fact basically a bag of soil from Home Depot. So whereas McVeigh got some stuff that really is explosive, that when it is diluted with a bunch of other things makes for good fertilizer, Faisal Shahzad, the Times Square bomber, sort of bought a bunch of dirt and put it in a van. And so even if his bomb had gone off, what probably would have happened is all the dirt that he had in the car would have absorbed the impact rather than hurt other people. But McVeigh said kill 168 with also somebody named Terry Nichols. They were part of, kind of loosely connected to, an anti-government militia movement. You might have heard of some of these, Michigan militia, and some of these might have come up also recently if you follow news about things like insurrection on DC, or the attempt last year to kidnap Governor Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan that people got arrested for, also kind of connected to this militia movement. So say loosely connected, of where, it's not like McVeigh and Nichols were part of what I would call a terrorist group, but they say nevertheless to people who are adamantly anti-American and anti-government, not anti-American. From their perspective, they believe they are actually pro-American, and it's the government that is anti. What McVeigh thought he was doing, and this is an example of clearly political, he spoke about it afterwards and explained his motivations from jail. And he believed that his action was in self-defense, that it was a retaliation for what he believed to be overreaching government violence. I could trace this back a little further, that there are some scholars who argue that this goes back to aftermath of the Vietnam War, in which there were a lot of disillusioned veterans coming home who then got recruited into some of these organizations. But this is the first big attack associated with them. Those actions of the US government that loom very large within this subculture and that mattered a lot to McVeigh are the Ruby Ridge incident, which was when in that case, it was FBI went to, and I think it's in rural Idaho, and was trying to arrest some guy who was isolationist, kind of self-sufficiency, anti-government sort, and who had both had trained his kids to be also strongly suspicious of the government and that the government's coming to like take you over. And so when the FBI came there, the guy and his kids shot at the FBI, and the FBI shot back. It's not totally clear who fired first, so I don't say whose fault that was, but the result was everybody in the family getting killed. Waco, Texas. This was with an incident of what was believed to be a cult, and where in that case it was ATF, so the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, who ended up killing everybody there in an attempt, in theory, to stop the leader and save them. So in McVeigh's world, these were both government attacks on the American people, and that the American people, in particular white Americans, needed to respond. McVeigh was also a fan of something called the Turner Diaries, which is a white supremacist fiction, like a fantasy about a like not too distant future America in which authority has collapsed and government shock troops that are the remains of the government on behalf of blacks and Hispanics and Jews are going around trying to destroy the good white people of America, and the whites kind of rise up and fight back, and they're portrayed as the good guys. And McVeigh had a copy of that and was a fan of it. And there are things that if you hear anybody say any stuff related to this, even now, kind of on the internet, a lot of them end up being kind of recalls of Turner Diaries, even if they don't necessarily know it. So even in the way some people who are very critical, for example, of Black Lives Matter protests and related riots over last year, in some ways reference the Turner Diaries or reference things they didn't even realize were referencing the Turner Diaries. You remember last time we talked about the difference between lone wolves and self-starters, where the self-starter supports the organization movement but does it themselves, and where the lone wolf is totally unconnected. So the Boston Marathon bombers, San Bernardino attackers, good example, self-starters. The lone wolf of the Unabomber, and the reason why I bring this up is, as you'll see, this movement ends up being more self-starter based than organized group based. So while McVeigh was, say, part of some of these like militia groups who trained together, this was his plot, as best we know, really was him and Nichols, and that was probably it. Maybe one other person who kind of supported or helped them plot it, or helped them get some of the explosive materials. But it was not like Al Qaeda sending a bunch of people to hijack planes, or ISIS sending a bunch of operatives to attack Paris, or something along those lines. You don't have an organized group with a leader that was doing it. That they mostly did it themselves, but not totally unconnected to anything larger, so therefore not lone wolves. Where this gets kind of, I was going to say weird. Where this gets weirder is that it is kind of transnational. So how can you manage to have people who are white nationalists and yet the movement is transnational? It's sort of similar to how there are movements against globalization that are globalized. To an extent, I describe Al Qaeda and ISIS as anti-globalization, and yet they are globalized movements taking advantage of it. And that what stands out about the white nationalist movement is they tend to take inspiration from each other rather than having an organized group that can be attacked. So this is Anders Breivik. He killed 77 people, injured 319 in an attack in Norway in 2011. He was also anti-government. He described himself as a crusader. So it would, and he wrote a manifesto, had a big cross on it. It would not be unreasonable to call him a Christian terrorist. As like we've been talking about, say, or a radical Christian terrorist, in the way we've talked about, say, Al Qaeda as a radical Islamic terrorist. But he was especially opposed to Muslim immigration to Norway. He also used it was 2 attacks. First, a car bomb, also using fertilizer, possibly taking inspiration from McVeigh. Killed 8 in Oslo, that was near the prime minister's house. And then he went to this island, I think it's like island in a big river, maybe a lake, but an island that has a summer camp that is popular with the governing party's children. And he killed 77 people, most of them kids. Most of them kids whose parents worked in government. And what he was trying to convey was, and also trying to, as his manifesto said, inspire people to rise up, but was to Norwegians especially, but people everywhere, in particular, not just people, sorry, let me rephrase that, white people, white Christians, in Europe, North America, to rise up against what he thought was the racial kind of ethnic dilution of white people by, in particular, Muslim immigrants. So is Breivik, say, a self-starter, a lone wolf, something else? Well, he did it himself, which would say lone wolf. Like, there's no indication that he was part of any organized group, that anybody gave him orders. He seemed to be kind of inspired by McVeigh, though, in trying to inspire others, especially with the inspiring others, where he made a big. This is from his trial. This photo. He made a big point of trying to turn it into a show, and he had this big manifesto that he was able to get out there as a result of his attack. And so he was trying to inspire others. It was almost like he was kind of like a self-starter, trying to start a self-starter movement. So it doesn't quite neatly fit into any of the categories. Whoops. Oh no, wait a minute. Okay, hang on. Hang on, I'm sorry. I loaded up the wrong one. Yep, sorry, bear with me. I have this is an old version of this. I've done a bunch of updates for you to take kind of new information. Sorry, bear with me. I apologize. Oh no. Oh crap. Okay. I think I wrote over a bunch of slides that I spent a bunch of time putting together this morning. That stinks. Oh well. Okay, I guess I'll just tell you about it. Damn it. Yeah, I think I went and saved the old one over the new one as opposed to the new one over the old one, which is really unfortunate. All right, so the beyond Breivik, reason why I especially brought him up is where this seems to go transnational, is what really clues into everybody, is 2 years ago with the attack in Christchurch, New Zealand. And the Christchurch shooter, so he targeted 2 mosques, and he live streamed it, which was something that hadn't been done before. So you could watch, and I think millions of people did, watch this guy go into mosques and shoot people that he was recording on a GoPro in real time. One other thing that stood out about it is it was a very internet-based attack, by which I mean he did things like reference a variety of memes in the process of it. He was very online, capital both letters. Among other things, before he started his attack, he said subscribe to PewDiePie, with which I'm guessing most of you know, but was especially at the time, a very popular YouTuber, and he was going to be overtaken as the #1 YouTuber by, it was like a Bollywood, I think, station, or like an Indian music channel. And so a lot of people from internet culture and like other YouTubers rallied to, we got to keep him #1. And the reason why, I think so, to the extent he actually thought it through, the Christchurch shooter probably said that so that people like me would end up talking about it. And that PewDiePie himself made a statement about how, that he wants nothing to do with this guy, and like, keep my name out of your mouth and other things like that. But that meant somebody with, about 100 million YouTube followers, then, or YouTube subscribers, then, mentioned it. So it got, say, really famous in that regard. Facebook and other sites had a lot of trouble. So it was originally on Facebook Live, had a lot of trouble taking it down, where he had, we subsequently found out, hung out on some anonymous forums, in particular on 4chan and 8chan, among kind of white nationalist online subcultures, and referenced the meme that, well, I had reference, which I don't necessarily want to repeat, but reference kind of anti-Muslim memes also, including ones that are tongue-in-cheek, originally come out of gaming culture, referring to kebab, which I'm guessing that, say, some of you are familiar with this, and I'm not going to get into in too much detail. But so overall, he had referenced Breivik, claimed to be inspired by it, and also a theory that has kind of connected to a bunch of these that is known as Great Replacement Theory. What that theory says is that the governments of predominantly white countries, namely United States, Canada, and Europe, are deliberately bringing in non-white immigrants and non-Christian immigrants for the purpose of diluting the white race and eventually leading to what they refer to as white genocide. Um, Needless to say, I'm sure, well, I suppose I should say anyway, that this is a conspiracy theory for which there's no evidence, but it is something that, say, is, popular in these subcultures, not unlike how McVeigh thought that it was a conspiracy against a certain type of American, rather than what it almost certainly was, both Ruby Ridge and Waco, which was a government operation that screwed up. Good rule of thumb with conspiracy theories. I have a general rule that the more formal term I've given it is the human fallibility test. The informal term, don't write this on a paper, is the human fuck up test. And that is if your story does not allow for humans fucking up along the way, you're probably wrong. People fuck up all the time. And so these really elaborate conspiracies, when I say, and relatedly to that, government agents aren't that good. I always think it's a weird juxtaposition of when you hear conspiracy theorists of a lot of times will be like, oh, the government sucks. They can't do anything right, except for this one conspiracy. They did it so perfectly and left behind no evidence. So usually a clue. When you ask yourself, how did they actually do that and not leave any evidence? Then usually it's a problem because the answer is nobody's that good. So there are real conspiracies, but we usually find out about them because nobody's that good. People screw up along the way. So yeah, a grand conspiracy like that, no evidence for it whatsoever. But he believed it, say, in Christchurch. And there were other attacks that were similarly inspired, including the largest anti-Hispanic terrorist attack in the United States, anti-Latino, which was the El Paso Walmart shooting in 2019. That one also, so that was in Texas. And the killer there also released a manifesto, also referencing the Great Replacement Theory and white nationalism, also citing Breivik as a hero and citing the Christchurch killer as a hero of his, and talking about how if he didn't do something here, clearly political, therefore clearly terrorism, if he didn't do something about it, that Texas was going, white people in Texas were going to be destroyed. They were going to be the victims of genocide if he didn't do something quickly about Latino immigration. That, in, say, his perspective. I suppose that I, should add the caveat, although I'm thinking probably most of you know it already, that when we try to understand these people, say like Al Qaeda or like the transnational white nationalist terrorists, that the point is to understand it better, both for knowledge's sake and to figure out how to beat it. And that this is not something that comes up as much today, but after September 11th, there was a fairly common response that if you try to understand them, that you're sympathizing with them. Why, if you say, why did they do it? And you explain in the way I'm explaining to you, oh, this is why they did it from their perspective, that is somehow sympathizing with them in some manner. And the answer is more like if you don't, so like you never hear this in, say, I don't know, sports of, well, why did the coach do that? Why are you sympathizing with the other teams? No, I'm like trying to figure out their plays. How do you expect me to be able to beat them if I don't know what they're doing? But so the El Paso shooter, and then also there was a third one, which was a smaller attack, but at the Poway Synagogue in California, and that killed one. What's interesting about the Christchurch, El Paso, and Poway shootings is all three of them hung out in the same forums on 8chan, and where it ranges from people who think they're being edgy with kind of racist jokes, all the way up to very openly unabashed Nazis. Like full on, like with the swastikas and Hitler was right, and like I'm not just using the word Nazi as an attempted insult. I mean literally cast themselves as Nazis. And the result of this was the companies that were hosting 8chan kicked it off. And it bounced around. This is also why it's under a different name now, 8kun or Kun. Never know how you say it out loud. I've only read it, but KUN instead of Chan. And what's noteworthy about these sites is that because they are anonymous and have very lax, if any, content moderation standards, that people tend to, whether joking or not, in some cases I think probably joking, and in some cases we know definitely weren't, but also do things encourage each other, and in some ways treat it almost like a video game, where you can see things about how, like, the Christchurch shooter got a high score, and there were logs from some of these chats about how the Poway shooter sucked because he only killed one person, and what a loser that guy is. But so these are all, again, not lone wolves, but not members of a terrorist group. And they aren't even really inspired by a terrorist group. They're self-starters that are kind of encouraging each other, both through actions, like treating Breivik and Christchurch shooter as heroes, but also through these online forums, among others. So that one is starting to look a whole lot like a movement. Not especially, it's different from the jihadist movement in that there are no organized groups. We can bomb ISIS, we can bomb Al Qaeda. We can't really bomb these people. We don't know where they are, or at least they don't have things like headquarters and training camps and the like. And because they don't have these organizations, because they're inspiring each other, that makes it very difficult to spot in advance. Just like this thing I mentioned on Monday, the self-starter issue of where you can find somebody who's a member of a group, where if you capture, like if you have somebody, oh, I know this person's in ISIS, then you can check their cell phone, find out everybody they called. You can check their email, find out everyone they're in contact with, and investigate them. That's a path to mapping out the network. Whereas here, you can't really do it because they're not part of any organization. They're not in contact with each other. And to the extent that they're in contact on online forums, a lot of that is just people who are like trying out the ideas, or who think they're being subversive, that they're being edgy, something like that. And so it becomes very hard to trace. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the question was about the Proud Boys, and that even more so groups like, I'll still try to put together a whole thing on the Capitol attack and these groups for you, but the Proud Boys are into street violence primarily, like just going around beating people up, and then did organize, participate in the Capitol attack, and I think they're concerned. The ones that even heading into it, I've been more concerned about for a while, are organized militias called the Oath Keepers and the Three Percenters. And they, Oath Keepers in particular, a lot of presence at the Capitol attack, a lot of evidence they planned it in advance. A lot of them have been arrested, charged with conspiracy. The FBI appears to be building to a case of arresting the founder, who did not commit violence himself, but was seen at the Capitol on a cell phone. And I have pretty strong suspicions, can't prove, but pretty strong suspicions that that was real-time battlefield command. He also, the guy who founded the Oath Keepers, is a veteran. He's a Rhodes Scholar. There are a few of the people who get involved in these sort of things who I think of almost like a, I don't know, evil version of me, as in, like, you're not just somebody who was angry and grabbed a gun. You're somebody who understands this stuff, who's kind of like a student of this stuff and is doing it anyway, as opposed to, say, me on the opposite side of that. But those groups, you can do that group tracing network mapping techniques against. Yes, that because then they're all part of the same organization. They go to meetings. They're in contact with each other. They're on things like email lists, and or like unsubscribe to this list, like they are subscribed to it to get the communication. But so those are ones that are being dismantled, and that I took as a silver lining of the Capitol attack, was that I've been wanting the government to go after, in particular, the Oath Keepers for some time, that seeing them as kind of a national security threat. And so the result of the attack itself could have been so much worse with way more people dead. So that, as much as I would have preferred it never happened, the fact that it happened did make it that the things like the FBI and other government forces started taking them a lot more seriously, which I would say is a silver lining to it. But so those I wouldn't call part of the same culture. That is overlap in some ways, but somewhat different. Hang on. So Does the same apply for internet groups like QAnon? So yeah, QAnon I had as like one of the final questions, and QAnon is weird in that it's a really sprawling kind of conspiracy movement with a lot of people that are even like into, but it's kind of like chatting with people in puzzle games and stuff online, and aren't violent, but have just a small, but others have co-opted it. And it really is, if you took it at all seriously, it would lead you to violence. How many do take it seriously? Don't know. Had before at least Trump was out of office, had millions of believers, but how many of those would actually believe in violence? Unclear. But one thing I'd warned about in advance, and I'm still concerned about with this, is if only say 1% are actually violent, that's still a lot of people, a lot of potential terrorists. There was unquestionably a Q presence at the Capitol, and people seem to really believe in the conspiracies that Trump was secretly feeding them orders via a anonymous. It would take me almost too long to get into it. I think I'll lump that one into. There's clearly interest in it, so I'll put together a whole lecture on a lot of those for you. I got just one more question here about, do you ever worry your studies or lectures will be used by terrorism for someone? Yeah, kind of. This is something that everybody who studies this stuff and talks about it deals with. Of I remember I was accused once at a conference, not totally seriously, but it's like, are you trying to like, get around American security, or like that I was advocating, not advocating, but like helping create a super terrorist? And that's just one of the risks you take with it. So I think the answer is you got to kind of balance it out. Um, the one thing, especially when these are videos, so things like I don't tell people how you can build a bomb at home or how you can make chlorine gas at home, both of which I know how to do. But so those things I leave out. But um, yeah, it is a tough question with it. The other part, though, of the white nationalist attacks, so the ones where the the insurrection at the Capitol is more complicated. I think it's fair to say I think it's fair to call it far right. But specifically on like white nationalists, white supremacists, there are definitely some presence there that's mixed up in it. But the primary motivations seem to be more pro-Trump than pro-white nationalist per se. Those things are not totally unrelated, but not in the same way that like a Breivik was clearly motivated by things like race, ethnicity, religion, whereas I wouldn't say that the people who attacked the Capitol were, or at least that was their dominant motivation. The other ones, so I mentioned El Paso, but other important ones that are not necessarily connected directly to that great replacement theory, that don't hang out in the same forums online, but I would classify as this, include the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting, which is the largest anti-Semitic attack in US history. That was in 2019. And the attacker openly said it was because a Jewish charity was helping to bring in Muslim refugees, helping Muslim refugees and bring them into the country, and that that means that his country was being invaded by foreigners, and so he was going to do something about it, and he killed a bunch of people at a synagogue. There were attempts to attack Somali immigrants at a complex in Kansas. There was a successful attack on a mosque in Quebec, and a few others, so connected to similar ideology, also similarly self-starters. But you can think anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim especially. I'd also incorporate one that doesn't fit any of those, but is the Charleston Church shooting. And that one really clear example of terrorism, because the attacker picked a historically black church, killed 9 black people, had made videos in advance of this about how that white people were being suppressed in America and are being oppressed in America, and that how do you not realize that all these racial minorities, especially black people, are the ones who are really in charge and are hurting us, and you all need to rise up and follow me, and I hope to inspire you. Kind of like what Breivik did, but specifically in that case, anti-black. So that one I'd say is a pretty clear case of terrorism. Um, all of these together make it that over the last decade, about 75%, little over, of extremist killings in the United States are far-right white nationalists, white supremacists. About 23% are jihadists, and then another 2% that I would classify as far left. A example of far left terrorism would be one that didn't kill anybody, but somebody connected to Antifa who firebombed a ICE, so Immigration Enforcement Center, and I think it was New Mexico, might be Arizona. No, wait, Arizona. It's in Arizona. Um, and in 2017, somebody who was a fan of Bernie Sanders went and shot at a Republican congressman at a congressional baseball game. Severely injured one, but didn't kill anybody. Now I say to somebody who's a big fan of Bernie Sanders, the Cyrus Bush also add that Bernie was very quick about denouncing this, and I never told anybody to do anything like that, and I oppose it. But a lot of times people who in part say might get a impression in their head, sort of like say QAnon people who think Donald Trump is giving them secret orders through the internet. All of these. Oh, so question: is there an explanation to why there's much less far left terrorism in our current history? Uh, I mean, not really. So it varies at different times throughout history. The 1970s were probably more of a there was a lot more far left terrorism. In that case, there was stuff connected to some was environmental, some was anti-corporate. There were some in case like anti-war and anti-government related to Vietnam at far left anti-government as opposed to far right. At other times, there's the Weathermen is an example of that. Weather Underground, sorry, not the Weathermen. The Weathermen are a band. The Weather Underground is the name of the group. Um, the and then there have been different like communist or socialist violence. So part of it, there might be an element of end of the Cold War that is tied up in that, perhaps. I don't really have a good explanation. If somebody said when this gets filtered, there's a good example of recency bias. When this gets filtered through current politics, some people would be like, well, because the right wing is violent and the left wing isn't, and come on, that doesn't match numbers overall. But in terms of what are current terrorist threats, quite reasonable to say, okay, what has killed people over the last 10 years? Relatedly, though, when I bring this up, a lot of times, not just me, but you'll see people talk about how many Americans killed by terrorism since 9/11. And sometimes people, especially if they have an interest in arguing that jihadist terrorism is by far the most dangerous, will say, oh, isn't that convenient? Just since 9/11, aren't you leaving something big out? And the answer, the reason why we mark it after that is because the United States installed a lot of new counter-terrorist and anti-terrorist measures after September 11th. So if you want to judge what is a threat now, you want to look at what has managed to kill Americans or US allies, or people anywhere, really, if you were curious, but say just from an American perspective, killed Americans since we put all those new measures in place. It's like, who can get through the current security system, as opposed to who could get through it before we put it all in place. So there's a ongoing threat, and it's something that the government previously had not taken very seriously. Two examples of what I mean by the government not taking it seriously or actively looking away from it. One is that in 2009, a Department of Homeland Security analyst, counterterrorism analyst named Daryl Johnson, produced a report warning of far-right extremist terrorism. In particular, he warned that there were extremist groups that were recruiting veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan. And he put this together in a report, and this was just after Obama got elected, so in 2009, first year of his presidency. And when the Department of Homeland Security started releasing the report, a lot of Republicans, especially in Congress, objected, said that the Obama administration was just smearing conservatives, was smearing veterans. How could you say that about our valiant veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan? And the Obama administration responded by burying the report. Johnson has, especially since the Capitol attack, and groups like the Oath Keepers and the Three Percenters, which recruit veterans into their extremist organization, Johnson has been on a what would probably be called an "I told you so" tour in the media, and I think one that is totally deserved. And not a like "I told you so" and look at how happy I am, but a very frustrated "I told you so. You should have listened to me" argument. And the one other is early on in the Trump administration, one of his first acts as president was to take a program called the Countering Violent Extremism Program and order it to focus on jihadists only. So it's Muslims only, as opposed to it used to be focusing on all extremist threats. Now, post-Capitol attack and other incidents, including the El Paso shooting and the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting probably adds to the motivations of this, but in particular, the Capitol attack and the attempt to the thwarted attempt to kidnap Governor Whitmer over the summer have both done a lot to motivate the US government to take this a lot more seriously. And now we see things like the military putting in an effort to try to remove extremists from its ranks to address the fact that far from a majority, but not close enough to zero, people are sympathetic to some of this stuff. Same thing with police departments. That there was a pretty um, I'd say maybe unsettling or harrowing article in the New York Times just a couple days ago about how there were a number of incidents involving Proud Boys that police just sort of overlooked, and making the argument that, in part, that it's indicating that there was, some sympathy, at least among some individual police, for some of these actions, or perhaps, disliking the same people that they were attacking. So there is a greater government effort to address it. But the one thing I can tell you I'm very wary of is no new domestic terrorism law. That you might have heard some people advocating for it. This one is my opinion, so I'll give that as a caveat. But I know some people have advocated new domestic terrorism law, and I'm a strong opponent of that. And the reason why is not because I think we shouldn't be taking these domestic terrorists seriously. I mean, we should, and I've been writing a lot about how we should. But because the government already has an immense amount of power to do so, has a lot of capabilities to do so. And I personally, and you're welcome to disagree with this one I think is certainly something up for debate. But I am warier of giving government new powers, and my suggestion to people when you think of giving government security powers is don't think of a president you like using it, think of a president you don't like abusing it. So I would be especially wary of giving currently the US government, the executive branch can designate foreign terrorist organizations. It's the State Department that formally does it, but that basically means the president. And those organizations then have things like the Treasury Department freezing their funds and greater permission automatically for the CIA and the military to go after their members. There is no official US domestic terrorism law. The president cannot say that group is a domestic terrorist and therefore we can do more to violate their rights, for example, or like some of their rights are suspended, and like you can surveil them more, you can arrest them preemptively or something like that. Canada, for example, has made designated the Proud Boys as a terrorist organization. The United States legally under current law cannot do that because they are a domestic group, but nevertheless the government still has arrested a bunch of them, and that's because they broke a bunch of other laws. Yeah. I mean, yeah, potentially. So the question was about RICO, which is the anti-racketeering laws. It was basically laws invented to go after the mafia crimes that, the mob would, so I guess the mafia, and this is like in particular, the originally, I mean, where a lot of these laws came from was the Italian mafia in New York, like the one that's in The Godfather and Goodfellas, and later expanded to other, like a Chinese mafia, Russian mafia, other ones. But that the people that were high up would never commit any crimes, and they were always careful about assuming they were always being recorded. So this is why movies make fun of it, but it is actually has a basis in truth, where it would be like, so did you do the thing? And that's not an admission of a crime, and or where would say, to an extortion scheme would never go to somebody and say, if you don't give me money, I'm going to burn down your store. Instead, would say something like, there's a lot of businesses that have accidentally caught on fire around here. It'd be a real shame if that happened to yours. And little ways of kind of weaseling around what technically can be proven as a crime in court. And so RICO was anti-racketeering, where you can basically charge a bunch of people as connected to and involved with a crime. The running joke among lawyers of it's never RICO, and how like RICO is one of those things that is more prevalent in Hollywood or even, I don't know, Law and Order or something than it is in actual life. So I don't think that they're going after them under those laws specifically. It's more the one that they've drawn on the most is conspiracy. So it is illegal under various laws, but if people commit a crime, it is illegal to plan that crime, to like help figure it out in advance, and even if you don't end up executing it, as long as the plan is far enough advanced, that itself is a crime. So as long as they can prove that people with the Capitol attack in particular, the people like the Oath Keepers or the Proud Boys had discussed in advance the use of violence, then the fact that they were actually there committing violence means that everybody that they talked about it with in any sort of planning capacity is guilty of, well, at least would need to be proven in court, but is uh, chargeable with what is a quite serious federal crime. So yeah, conspiracy has been the main charge. Um, on the details of RICO, I defer to, I'd say, ask a lawyer, like where then we're getting to kind of the edges of my expertise. But yeah, they've been doing charges of like conspiracy and things, conspiracy to a variety of charges. But the conspiracy against the United States, I mean, really, you can have like conspiracy to murder, conspiracy to assault. It's accessory to the broad, you didn't do the crime, but we know that you're part of it type of charges. Um, how culpable are politicians for forgiving domestic terrorists? The post-Capitol response is very telling of how far they will go to turn a blind eye. It depends. The Capitol attack is weird. I mean, also, I wouldn't totally call them terrorists. I mean, I think insurrectionist is probably the best word for it. But the how forgiving. So it's a weird attack because I mean, this is one of those where I can't possibly say something without it sounding kind of partisan, but the answer is because most members of one political party and connected media are lying about it. And so they've clearly seen it as a political liability for them, even if they weren't personally involved with it. So that is not really the same in terms of forgiving domestic terrorists. Um, just also, I think it is reasonable. You've probably heard some people complain about this, but that there's evidence behind it. That in general, the American security state, especially things like local police, are more gentle with white killers and with non-white killers, that they are quicker to shoot back, that there are, number of photos you can see of people like the Charleston church shooter is a good example of just recently with this guy in Atlanta with the Asian massage parlors. The chief of police said something about how, or I think it was chief of police, but it was a police spokesperson, said about how he was having a really bad day, and a number of people picked up on that of like, do you really say that when the shooter isn't white? Like, is that, if this guy were Muslim, like let's say, or black, would we have that same sort of response? I don't know, at least not as frequently. So that you could say is partially in terms of forgiving domestic terrorists, that the level of crackdown could be different. Any other questions? Okay, so I'll stop there. I will get those other slides. I mean, I basically told you the stuff that was on it, things like, the 4chan stuff and the Charleston church shooter and the Post synagogue shooter and the rest of them. But I'll find those. There's got to be in like a deleted file somewhere, or like go back to previously. I can't believe I did that. It was really good too. Like I had it all. I mean, you can see I have half of this in my head, but I had it all set up, and there was another graphic or two, and I'll find it. But that's annoying. Okay. Thanks everybody. Have a good rest of your day, good weekend, and I will see you Monday.